What is up, my ducks and drakes? Welcome to the Credit Lake, and today we'll be reading Bad Guy, a Standard-Size fanfic by Bekka911 on Wattpad. I have read this before. In fact, this was the very first fanfic I have ever read on my channel, and I recorded that when I was 13 years old, and honestly, when I recorded it, I was only a month into being 13, so basically still 12, and now I look back on that and I'm like, oh, Lord, why are these videos so popular? And I panic, and so we'll be rereading them for not so much any of you guys listening, just for myself to know that I could do better. Please check out Bekka's story in the description below. I'd like to thank them for giving me permission to read these. I appreciate it loads. And with that, Bad Guy, Standard-Size fanfic. Summary. If he was drowning, he'd just have to learn how to swim, even if he was tempted to let himself go under. Chapter 1. I'm not always the bad guy. The words lingered in his head as he laid in his bed, staring up at the stars. His room didn't have a roof, but of course none of the others knew that. Nobody ever ventured into his room before. They were all too wary of him. They probably should be wary of him. He was wild and unpredictable. He might hurt them. He scoffed bitterly. Knocking on his door caused him to jump slightly. He rolled his eyes. He was quite comfortable where he was. The knock came again, and he literally rolled out of bed, clambering to his feet and trudging over to the doorway. Cracking the door open slightly, he sighed as he spied Roman. He wasn't in the mood today. "What do you want?" he snapped irritably. "Thomas is making a video," the fanciful side announced. "And?" Prince faltered. "Don't you want to come watch it?" "Not particularly." "Come on, Anxiety," he pleaded. "Thomas is our host. You could at least pretend to be interested." Anxiety closed his eyes and exhaled. "Fine." It wasn't that he didn't like Thomas. In fact, he was very fond of the boy. It was just that he didn't want to be disturbed today. It was one of those days. He really just wanted to be left alone. Prince dragged the darker side towards the studio. The studio was the main control room of Thomas's mind. They could watch what he did, hear what he said, that sort of thing. Anxiety didn't even have to look to know Thomas was stressed, but he didn't know what about. That troubled him. Not knowing. For once, it wasn't him adding to Thomas's stress. The young host was doing it all on his own. Without warning, he found himself being summoned, and was immediately dumped in the real world. "Anxiety," Thomas welcomed dolefully. "What are you doing here?" "What do you mean, you summoned me?" Anxiety stared at his host in a masked concern, noticing the bags under his eyes and the tiredness of his posture. "You look horrible." "Not my fault," Thomas said lowly, voice harsh like broken glass. Anxiety recoiled slightly. Thomas had never been so aggressive to the sides before. Thomas stared at Anxiety. "Have you been keeping me up at night?" "No," he answered honestly. "Why do I feel like you're lying?" Thomas's face was twisted with suspicion. "I'm not," the side protested. "I've done nothing." Immediately, he felt Thomas's stress level rise, and panic began to set. "Thomas? If you're not causing it, then what is?" he muttered. Anxiety glanced quickly at the camera. "Are you recording?" Thomas shook his head. I was, but now..." His growing panic triggered Anxiety's zone, and both started breathing quickly. Anxiety did the only thing he could think of. "Patton!" Dad appeared almost instantly and quickly took in the situation. He turned to Anxiety, eyes softening as he took in the clenched hands, the trembling breaths, the pale face. "I thought something was wrong," he murmured. "I'm not sure what you've triggered, but I'll deal with it." "I didn't do anything," Virgil promised, but Patton was already turning his attention back to Thomas. Thomas? Morality cooed soothingly. Thomas, listen to me. Deep breaths. That's it. He looked up at Anxiety, mouth pinched. You can go now, Anxiety. Numb, he nodded and disappeared. Shock coursed through his system. Logan and Roman were gathered in the studio when he appeared, frowning as they watched Patton talk to their host. They turned twin glances on him. When he fully materialized, hands jumped deep in his hoodie pockets. What happened? Roman demanded, but Anxiety shook his head. I don't know. He had a panic attack, Patton answered from behind him, adjusting his glasses. He looked tired. A pretty severe one, too. Plus, he hadn't been sleeping. I told him to go to the doctor to see if he can get something to help. What did you do, Anxiety? Prince breathed. I did nothing, he said defensively. What does everybody blame me? Statistically, it's you who causes the problems, Logic stated, clinically, face devoid of emotion. Anxiety sneered. To put it bluntly, you are the cause of majority of Thomas's troubles. Logic! Patton scolded, but his brown eyes were as sorrowful as he glazed in Anxiety. Harsh as it may be, though, I do agree with Logan. You do tend to be at the center of a lot of Thomas's problems, kiddo. It's my job, Anxiety protested. What else was he supposed to do? We don't require your presence here, Logan said, blandly, already turning away. Please leave. Enough, Logan! Patton took a step forwards towards Anxiety, but he flinched back. Anxiety? No, it's fine, he smirked feebly, stuffing the hurt deep down where it wouldn't be seen. I'll leave you morons to it. Without another word, he stalked away, willing himself to hold it together, at least until he could be alone. He could feel Thomas's panic thrumping in the air, and he chewed on his lip. Thomas had never reacted that negatively to him before, and the lack of concrete facts made Anxiety's skin crawl. For once, Anxiety hadn't done anything wrong. Why was he always the bad guy? Chapter 2. He was summoned again the next after a night of tossing and turning. He didn't need anything to enhance the bags under his eyes. They were prominent enough. Thomas didn't sleep, so why should he? Logan was already with Thomas when he appeared on the stairs, and they both carefully schooled their faces into neutral expressions as they turned to face him. Anxiety bristled slightly. Something foreboding stirring in his chest and squeezing his lungs. His breathing became shorter and harsher. You lied, Anxiety, Thomas said accusingly. Logan nodded in the background. At least this time, Thomas didn't look so defensively angry. Anxiety looked between his host and his fellow side. I did what? He frowned. I don't lie. I'm rude and sarcastic and dark, but I don't lie. Thomas has already relayed to me that he can't sleep due to the anxiousness that's plaguing him. There was something smug in Logan's brown eyes, the only sense of humanity Logan really had. Anxiety just clenched his jaw and swallowed down the hurt. Logan continued calmly. Your mere presence disturbs his core stability. This is detrimental to him. Anxiety, I assume you know that. What I fail to understand is why you do it. I don't. Is it some sort of inferiority complex? Logan seemed oblivious to the effect of his words. He seemed to be genuinely confused. Are you doing it with malicious intent? Why Anxiety? I fail to understand why you do what you do, or really, why you're here at all. Why were you created? You contribute nothing positive to Thomas's well-being. It was silent. For a heartbeat. Anxiety took several deep breaths. Logan wasn't setting out to hurt him. He knew that. The logical side was just dense. Is that how you feel, Thomas? Anxiety asked quietly. Thomas hesitated. Well, I would be able to do more if you weren't around. Anxiety nodded. Alright, okay. Without another word, he let himself sink back into Thomas's mind. Numb. No, that was a lie. He had so many feelings swirling around in his body, so many emotions, and he didn't know what to do with them. He couldn't process them fast enough. The others seemed to forget he felt everything twice as much, and despite his cold exterior, he was vulnerable. It was easy to drive him away, and they never seemed to think twice about it. His head throbbed, and black spots flickered in his vision as he appeared in the kitchen, almost falling on a Roman. The royal was just putting a carton of milk back in the fridge, staring at Anxiety, strangely as the side flexed his hands and struggled to take steady breaths. Rude, Roman muttered to himself, looking away again with a frown. Clearly I was here first. Stop talking, Anxiety said lowly, averting his eyes and trying to leave. His legs felt like jelly, his chest was getting tighter and tighter, and the fire was licking up in his throat. Roman made a small noise. Anxiety? A strangled cry crawled its way out of Anxiety's throat before he couldn't stop it, a low kneeing sound that amplified and echoed, and his eyes filled with tears. Anxiety, what's the matter? Stay away, he choked out, desperately trying to hold back sobs. Usually, he could make it to his room before he had an attack, but this was one had been building up for far too long for him to breathe it away. Just leave me alone. Anxiety, what's happening? Roman reached a hand out, tentative worry clouding his eyes. He hovered awkwardly because this was a line neither of them had dared to cross before. They were enemies, opposites, and yet Roman was willing to try and find some middle ground. Anxiety hated it. Nothing's happening, Anxiety forced out, gritting his teeth as the room spun. Nothing's wrong, I'm fine. You're not fine, Roman insisted, finding his determination. God, that's all the side wanted to do, wasn't it? Save the day, fight the bad guy. Anxiety shook his head and moved away, hating that his feet couldn't move him in a straight line. I'm fine, he spat defensively. I'm fine! He couldn't let Prince see how broken he was on the inside. I'm fine! Internally, he was cursing himself for being so reckless, for letting himself in the weakness be seen so clearly. I'm fine! Anxiety. He ran before Prince could stop him, heart pounding in his ears. He'd spent years bottling it all up. He spent so long soaking up all the harsh words and the blame. He was at his breaking point. His room was welcoming as he burst through the door, clutching his chest. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, and his eyes felt puffy and red. He crashed on the bed and stopped, fighting the tear that pounded in his veins. Instantly, his vision flared, ruby in his skin, itched and crawled. Thoughts flooded his brain. Terrible, negative thoughts and feelings assaulted his chest. His heart throbbed with pain, and he curled up into a ball, clawing wildly at his arms and wrists. His skin was scorched too thin, and he was burning too hot, and he was alone. He was alone. He was alone. He was alone. Logic felt the slightest twinge of something as Anxiety bowed his head and disappeared, but he brushed the feelings off and turned to Thomas. The boy was staring at his hands, his lower lip trembling as he held back tears. Logic sighed. Feelings were the bane of his existence. What is it about the situation that concerns you? He asked, trying to keep his voice gentle. Obviously, his host was distressed, and the only way to combat that was comfort. Thomas looked up, and he looked so young that Thomas almost felt bad. But without Anxiety, I wouldn't be me. The teacher blinked. What do you mean? Do you want him to stay? Well, no. Thomas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. But he was created by me. He is a part of me. If he's gone, then Part of my personality, part of me, is gone too. Well, technically speaking, you're right. Logan adjusted his glasses, pondering the words. Thomas would be going without a manifested part of his personality. But if he was only negative, Logan didn't understand why not. Have you been told anything about how to limit your anxiety? Thomas looked at his hands again before exhaling heavily. The doctor prescribed some anxiety meds, he said tiredly, holding up a bottle. He said they're the best he could get because I seemed like an extreme case. I think he was properly listening to what I was saying, but apparently they were actually pretty strong. Logic gaped, speechless. Thomas tipped 2 of the tiny pills into his palm and smiled sadly. Will they affect him badly? I don't know, Logan admitted, and Thomas sucked in a sharp breath. I can't theorize that they may have a heightened effect due to anxiety being a heightened trait of your personality, but this time, Thomas, I really don't know. Thomas squeezed his hand shut and swallowed the pills dry as one alone tear traced his cheek. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to continue listening to this story, I'd recommend subscribing so you could hear the rest. If you'd like to check out the book for yourself, it is in the description below. I really recommend you do. It's such a nice fic, and if you could show some support to the author, that would be wonderful. In the description, there's also links to a whole bunch of things like Discord, TikTok, Etsy, things like that. So feel free to check those out as you please. Thank you so much for listening, and much like Thomas trying to talk to anxiety, do your best.